Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing another television series review. This series is from Australia, English language, released in the year 2016, directed by Tony Tills, Jeff Bennett, Greg McLean and Kieran Darcy-Smith, and this series is called Wolf Creek. So Wolf Creek is set in the Australian Outback. We have 2 seasons. The first season, Mick Taylor, the brutal serial killer, picks off an American family that are going through the Australian Outback, but their teenage daughter survives this onslaught, and now she's going to spend the rest of her days trying to track Mick down in the Outback and exacting her own sense of justice. And the second series revolves around a bus full of tourists. So how each series unfolds is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Wolf Creek, the series. This is definitely a mixed bag. There are sporadic moments of brilliance, but there's also moments that really let it down. It's exactly the way I felt about Wolf Creek and Wolf Creek 2. Now, if you are familiar with the Wolf Creek franchise, the first Wolf Creek was definitely one of the best Australian horror films to come out, and it's one of my favourite horror films of all time. The cruelty of that movie was just seeped in realism, and it just a symbolisation of the ugliness and the beauty of Australia. So you have a serial killer that I thought was absolutely phenomenally played by John Jarratt. John Jarratt is a household name here in Australia, but he wasn't associated with evil, and so when he played Mick Taylor, I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but when I saw his performance I was absolutely blown away. And you've also got the other character of the Outback, which is just terrifying. The Outback is like the ocean. It looks beautiful, it's very vast, but it's very easy to get lost. And again, that showcases the beauty and the ugliness of Australia, and so the Outback is one and the same with Mick Taylor. And so when you see Australia, you see the tourism board, and you see what happens to these tourists, you're going to think twice about stepping foot in my country. It's like Jaws did for the ocean, is Mick Taylor does for the Outback. And so that was absolutely brilliant. I love that movie. It was really, really disturbing. But then Wolf Creek 2 came along. Now Wolf Creek 2 I was really psyched for. But that really let me down because it was much more Americanized. It actually felt much more of a film. It was a much more bigger budget, and it kind of defeated the purpose of the realism of the first film. So it was very similar to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre original and the original sequel. So I wouldn't be surprised if Greg McLean was a fan of those movies, because the first film was very raw and gritty, but the second movie is like sticking its finger up at the fans and making light of what you actually saw in the first, and so it defeats the purpose of it. So I left Wolf Creek 2 bitterly disappointed. I know that's an unpopular opinion because a lot of people loved it, but for me, I just wanted a lot more from it, and I just felt as though it was it was a sort of a parody of the first film, and that's kind of like an insult to the film fan and the fans of the original. So coming into the series, I wasn't sure what to expect. Was this going to go back to the roots of Wolf Creek and make a really deep and disturbing experience, or was this going to play more off Wolf Creek 2? And it does play off Wolf Creek 2 a lot more than it does off the original, and that can be a good thing and also a bad thing. This is a television series, and so to have a documentation on sheer realism and the sheer ferocity of that realism, I thought it could outstay its welcome quite quickly. And so in order to gather interest for a series and to keep people watching, you have to caricature it to a certain degree, and I definitely feel as though the caricature in this series was needed, so I can forgive that. But there are lots that I liked about it, and there's also a lot I didn't like about it. The things I didn't like about it I'll go into a little bit later, but what I loved about Wolf Creek the series was what I loved about the movies, Mick Taylor and the Outback. So as I said, they're one and the same. On one side you have Mick Taylor, who's a really friendly guy, really funny guy, a guy you could easily be friends with, but on the other side it's very evil and depraved, and he's based on real life serial killers, and so that's the most disturbing aspect. So if you are an Australian local, you will have heard of stories of these killers in the outback or the forests and doing horrible things, and so it hits home a lot harder for Australians. But then, as I said, the outback is the same. On one side you have the beautiful vast landscape, but on the other side, if you get lost and you don't have enough water, you could get things could go very bad very quickly. And so the outback really helps the villain because there's no easy way out, and so the series really plays on that, and I think it plays on it very well. There are some funny moments with Mick Taylor, and there are also some very brutal moments, and so the brutal moments, as I said, complement the character of itself and also the vast landscape that the movie is taking its setting on. So there's a lot to like about the series, as is a lot to like about the movies, but unfortunately there is one glaring issue that this series has. The first season especially, there's not enough Mick Taylor in it. And so because the overall story is not interesting enough, I kept looking at my watch waiting for the next time Mick was going to be introduced. So you have these characters of this family, you have the character of the teenage daughter. I just didn't really care about her plight. I just wanted to see her get killed. And so all the build-up really doesn't amount to anything because I just wanted to see Mick Taylor back in. When you have a villain that's supposed to be really scary but you're actually supporting him, this kind of defeats, again, the purpose of what this whole thing is supposed to be about. So I really didn't like that, and I just felt as though the first series just didn't have enough Mick Taylor in it. So you have side characters that come into it, but it just didn't feel the same. When you have something that really steals the limelight, but it's not in enough, you start to really notice that the rest of the series has a lot of shortcomings. So that was my biggest problem with the first series, but the second series, there's a lot more Mick Taylor. Now, so that's something I really liked, and I feel as though the second season is a lot better and saves it from being a complete waste of time. And so that is at least something that I enjoyed. I thought it was more brutal in the second series, and I just thought as though it was more suspenseful as well. So it has a darker heart. And so this Series 1 and Series 2 is definitely like Wolf Creek 1 and Wolf Creek 2. One movie is really good and the other one's a letdown, and in this series, one season's really good and the other one's a letdown. And so it's that same sort of inconsistency that I didn't like about the movies that is thrown into here. Also have another problem with the fact that they're trying to mould Mick Taylor into this horror slasher villain like Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger, and again, that defeats the purpose of that realism. You know, that person, that everyday person that you could befriend, but on the other side, once you know what he's like, on the other hand, it's already too late. And so that realism is what made the first film so great, but then the second movie was a lot more caricature, and this series is caricature to a point where I just feel as though making him a horror slasher icon is kind of defeating the purpose. And so I just don't really like that. I just feel as though keep him grounded in realism, and it's far more terrifying. So that was another issue I had with this series, and that's what prevents the series from being as good as it really could have. But putting that aside, there are series out there that are a lot worse. There are some truly brilliant moments in this, but unfortunately I just couldn't really get past the negatives that brought this show down to a point where it's serviceable, but unfortunately not absolutely fantastic like I was hoping it would be. So that is the review on this series. Overall, I'm going to give Wolf Creek 2.5 stars. One season is really good, the other season is not so good, and I just felt as though the inconsistencies was a little bit too much to overlook. So that's my review. I hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later. Bye.